Despite a loss on the resume, the Oklahoma Sooners are just about where we expected them to be, and expect them to be each and every year around the initial college football playoff rankings reveal, and that's a number 9. So they are squarely in the thick of things, but may need some help. We shall see. Got Jason Ray on the line from Last Word on College Football to break down Oklahoma before the Sooners can jump ahead and look too far down the line. They better deal with Iowa State, a team that's given them issues in recent years. That game in Norman on a Saturday night. Jason, how you doing today?
Doing good, Mark. Thanks for having me on, as always.
Oklahoma's had a couple of weeks to stew over this Kansas State loss. They didn't have a game last week, had a bye week to fix some things, but also stew over a loss in Manhattan that was largely unexpected as a 23 or 24-point favorite, a game in which Kansas State had to hang on to win. I certainly wanted, not from a rooting standpoint, but wanted Oklahoma to get that onside kick, as it appeared as though they did, just to see what the drama would unfold at the conclusion of the game. But Kansas State got the call and picked up the win. But before that, obviously, the Sooners had to put on a furious rally to get close. Right. I think Kansas State, after trailing 17-7 at one point, put on like a 41-6 run to go up big in that one, and which was obviously surprising. Your thoughts about Oklahoma's effort in that one and what appears to be an issue with the run defense?
Yeah, I think, Mark, we talked a lot about the improvement of the defense this year, and they sort of reverted back to their 2018, defensive play. They were out of position a lot, especially, to your point, especially in the run game. In the run game, they over pursued a lot. Kenneth Murray looked lost in the middle. They ran a little bit of misdirection just to make him think a little bit, and he. And then I think probably what was the most disappointing that you saw in the game was really just a lack of effort. I believe Kansas State scored on 7 consecutive possessions, kind of to your point there, where the game was at 17-7 through when the defense actually was able to get a couple of stops there down the stretch. I think disappointing in a lot of ways in terms of it's just something that you haven't seen out of this team this year so far. Especially, you go from how they played against Texas. Texas is certainly kind of struggling right now. But with the 9 sacks and just with the all-out defensive effort that you saw, and you just for whatever reason you just didn't see that in Manhattan. I kind of thought they might struggle kind of as a team in that game, Mark. They've just played pretty well every game. They've not had a game yet this year that they struggled. So I thought they might struggle, but I thought struggling would be kind of a 10 to 14 point win as opposed to that touchdown loss. So they've had a couple of weeks to certainly stew over that and see where that brings them. Like I said, one of the things that Grinch has predicated this defense on is maximum effort 100% of the time, and they just didn't have that. Watching the game, they looked shell-shocked there in the third quarter, especially in the third quarter. They even had a couple of 3-and-outs on offense, and then they had a special teams turnover where I think there was a little kind of a high onside kick where the receivers didn't communicate with one another, and then obviously the furious comeback that was just a little bit too late. If they'd done a little bit more work in the third quarter, they probably would have been in a better position to finish that out. So now, like you said, back to the drawing board. They still conceivably have all of their goals in front of them. Certainly from a Big 12 perspective. They do. They're still right there with Baylor. Of course, Baylor's still undefeated, of course, but they're still right there in second place. So they just, if they can, if they can take care of business. But I think the thing coming into not only Iowa State but the rest of the season was the beginning. Those first 7 games, was that the defense, or this 8th game that they played against Kansas State? Was that just an anomaly, or is that really what this defense is about. And certainly that's something that's going to get tested Saturday night in Norman against Iowa State.
Brees Hall is the guy to look out for on the edges to hit up the Oklahoma defense, as again they were gashed against Kansas State, and he would be the guy that would be able to accomplish that for the Cyclones if Oklahoma has not fixed those issues in the last 2 weeks. Brock Purdy has thrown 7 interceptions, but he did hit up Oklahoma State for 382 yards through the air in a near win as they fell by 1 score in that one. And they don't have much vertical passing threat there. They don't have the Hakeem Butler type that they had last season, but Charlie Kolar is certainly one of the better tight ends in the Big 12. If we flip the side of the ball there and look at the Oklahoma offense against the Iowa State defense, certainly the Oklahoma State offense, or the Oklahoma offense, prolific. Maybe one concern would be offensive line, maybe not playing up to elite standards, some penalties, some mishaps, some miscues up front.
Yeah, I think that's fair, Mark, especially against Kansas State. You know, the one thing that's interesting is the last couple of games, Jalen Hurts has had more carries than all of the other running backs combined. And specifically against Kansas State, I believe he had more carries than twice as many carries as all the other running backs combined. So I would look for less out of the running game from Jalen Hurts on Saturday, and a little bit more, out of those running backs. They have 3 good ones. All of them average over 7 yards a carry. They're just not, for whatever reason, they're just not getting the ball as much, especially over the last few games, especially. So I don't know if it's one of those things where Jalen's kind of making the decision to pull the ball a little bit more on some of those option reads, or Riley's just making that decision to get the ball into Hurts' hands a little bit more, obviously than he did in the past. But I think that point is well taken especially from a turnover perspective. I'm sorry, just kind of from an offensive line perspective, kind of thinking about the penalties. The penalties have been something that's been a big problem for them all year, not only just on the offensive line side, but overall through the team. I believe at one point they were last in the country in penalties and penalty yardage per game. It's certainly not really hurt them thus far this year. I mean, you kind of think, and the same thing that I mentioned after the Georgia game in the college football playoff. If you score 41 points at a school like Oklahoma, you should probably win. You shouldn't, especially against a team like Kansas State that, I think that was the most points that they'd scored this year, except for, I think, Bowling Green earlier in the year. They got in the 50s. But, it was certainly something was not expected on that side of the ball. But back to our original point with the offense, they had some opportunities where they left some things out there on the field. It's kind of hard to think about that when Jalen Hurts had almost 400 yards of offense himself and 4 touchdowns. But I think that kind of speaks to the level of consistency and the level of play that Riley has kind of demanded out of that team over the last few years. And it'll be interesting to see if they can put all of that back together for a complete game, and knowing that right now they pretty much have to be perfect, and then get a little help the rest of the way to kind of get back into that that 3rd consecutive playoff spot.
Christmas is coming, folks. Shop Amazon. Use the link in the description section below. It's the same shopping experience, so you might as well use that link. You don't need to buy the product you see. Just use the same link and do whatever you need to do shopping, and you help us build the channel. Oklahoma hosting Iowa State coming up on Saturday night. Of course, those initial college football rankings you alluded to, Oklahoma at number 9. The non-conference schedule did not play out as a very tough one. I'm sure that hurt. The Big 12 is deep. It's strong. It's maybe not we'll have to see how Baylor fares and what they show us in the coming weeks. They've started to play tougher opponents, and obviously they've won the games, maybe not looking dominant most of the time, but winning the games. But Texas hasn't been what we expected. So maybe the Big 12, I think, it's a strong, deep conference, maybe doesn't have an elite team or two to join Oklahoma. Again, we'll have to see about Baylor. But what do you think the committee told us with a 9 ranking on Oklahoma at this point?
a couple of things I think they told me. You hit it right on the head, Mark. The non-conference is it wasn't. They don't have a marquee win in the non-conference, and to be honest, with how Texas has struggled, they don't really have a solid win thus far this season. Texas probably is their best one, and Texas is obviously they're just outside the top 25 rankings at this point. So Oklahoma needs to do something that probably no Oklahoma fan would want. They need to have Texas continue to win to make that win look a little better. And then you would probably like to see Kansas State and Baylor obviously continue to win. I think it's kind of interesting. I think they, you have Utah right ahead of them in the Pac-12, and you've got Oregon ahead. I believe Oregon was at 6, so you've got a few teams ahead of them that'll probably knock each other out as the season goes on. But you have to think, you've got you'll have probably about 5 or 6 teams essentially fighting for one playoff spot, because you got to think that you got one playoff spot certainly dedicated to the SEC, whether that's Alabama, LSU, or potentially Georgia if they run the table and win the SEC championship game. Hard to believe that anybody could knock Clemson off at this point in the ACC. Then certainly you have probably Ohio State or Penn State. So a lot of people are, fighting for that last playoff spot. So even though it's not specifically considered a criteria, style points are always good this time of the year. And then you gotta kind of face the battle of, what does that last playoff spot look like? Does the committee think the Big 12 is strong enough to have a one-loss team get in there over perhaps a one-loss SEC team? Maybe the loser of Alabama, LSU is fighting with maybe the loser of Ohio State, Penn State in that. So there's a lot of football left to be played, but I think it was pretty telling in terms of the committee probably didn't think a whole lot of Oklahoma's performance against Kansas State, certainly, and then obviously the non-conference schedule wasn't quite as good as what they would have liked to see.
Got Jason Ray on the line from Last Word on College Football, setting us up for the Oklahoma game Saturday night against Iowa State, as the Sooners are ranked to 9th in the initial college football playoff rankings. The Florida State job is open. Willie Taggart has been dismissed after 21 games. And of course, big names are going to be at the forefront of what people want to talk about, even if they're not necessarily the names that are in the offering in reality. Urban Meyer comes to mind when a Florida State or a possible USC opening down the line. But Bob Stoops kind of surprised me in regards to, obviously, he's been away from the game for 3 years, as his name coming up. But I guess he wouldn't necessarily, let's see, this is Oklahoma Sooner Garnet or Crimson. I'm sorry. Please, Oklahoma fans, please help me out there. I no offense there, but I was anticipating what I was about to say. So I become an expert recently in color coding these panels, Jason. So there's Oklahoma. It didn't work out for me. I'm sorry. So my little experiment didn't work. But I just wanted to show everyone. I was about to show everyone that the slight adjustment there between Oklahoma Crimson and Florida State Garnet. So Bob Stoops wouldn't have maybe necessarily had to change the color code of his wardrobe that much going to Tallahassee. But despite all the hoopla, it doesn't appear as though he's going to Tallahassee.
No, I don't think so, Mark. And I think it was one of those things where it came out. You see, especially this time of the year when there's coaches that are being fired, and speculating coaches that are going, and then certainly to your point about USC coaches that haven't even been fired yet. But I think there's an unofficial coaching search maybe out there already. But yeah, I think that was very strange. I think there was a news outlet out of Tallahassee that actually had mentioned that Bob Stoops was finalizing a deal to become head coach, and it's one of those things where nothing, I guess, this day and age is completely surprising in terms of coaching, but with Bob Stoops has been consistent since he retired and said that he wants to spend time with a family. He doesn't have any immediate interest in kind of jumping back into the full-time rigors of coaching. Now, I say that I think there's a couple of jobs that he would probably make that change for. Notre Dame being one of them. I think he has said in the past that if that job would open, that he would potentially consider that, and maybe the NFL. I think he's still having fun watching the Suns play, and then of course having with the XFL, coming up pretty soon, as well. But yeah, I mean, I think that was, you heard the Stoops name, and then, to me, at least Bob was was the third one that I would think about. Of course, Mark Stoops at Kentucky was one of those that I, originally thought, and then, Mike Stoops would probably be a little bit of a stretch. I know he's an analyst with Alabama now, but yeah, Bob was the last one. So interesting kind of Twitterverse scuttlebutt there, but it was I think he kind of the very next day he came out, and some local media in Oklahoma had kind of talked with him, and he'd said, no, that's not the case. He's not a candidate. So apparently Florida State has went from Bob Stoops to Deion Sanders now. That's the new hot rumor that I've kind of read throughout the day today and last night. So
I have a little comment about Deion Sanders leading a major college football program. It would certainly gather headlines, and certainly, I'm sure, has already received plenty of clicks. But long-term success, I'm highly doubting that. So now we've got the Florida State color on the Oklahoma Iowa State bar. Let's see how close it is. It's extremely close. So it barely moves between the two colors. Anyway, my little experiment's over.
Very nice.
We got Oklahoma at home against Iowa State coming up on Saturday night. Jason Ray's been kind enough to drop by to set us up on the Sooners challenge against the Cyclones, and of course, as they head toward Baylor and other Big 12 efforts coming up. They still got TCU coming up as well. And of course, there's going to be a championship game, or this is all null and void in regards to the college football playoff. So there's going to be a rematch of sorts, of course, in Dallas the first week of December. Jason, we appreciate you stopping by.
All right. Thanks for having me, Mark.